Boker Tov, everyone, and welcome once again to Taste of Torah. I'm delighted to be with you here in the period of counting the Omer, the period between the holiday of Pesach, or Passover, and the holiday of Shavuot, or the holiday of weeks, as it's sometimes translated. Christians call it Pentecost. So when you hear that, you know they're talking Jewish in a kind of Gentile way. So anyway, we are in the middle of counting the Omer, but this is also a period of semi-mourning, perhaps, because this is the period during which the city of Jerusalem was besieged by the Babylonians. And just a few days earlier, we commemorated the day in which the exterior walls of Jerusalem were breached, preparing for the final assault. And we're headed towards the observance of Tisha B'Av, the destruction of the temple. However, in the interim, on Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, we are actually permitted to rejoice. And in the most acutely relevant way this year. The story goes that Lag BaOmer came about as a day of celebration because at that time, a plague which had been sweeping through northern Israel during the time of the rabbis in the Talmud ceased. And so it led to a great celebration. And I think we're just about there this year to really experience what Lag BaOmer is about. Most years, Reform Jews don't pay a lot of attention to Lag BaOmer. But this year we're going to do it. We're going to do it right. We got bonfires. We'll have a concert here at 7 o'clock on Friday night. It's going to be, I hope, a wonderful coming out party for us all as honors the holiday. All right. So mentioning Lag BaOmer takes me into our Torah portion, Emor. So Emor is mostly concerned with, first of all, the priests. It doesn't look so good on the camera there. The priests and their sacrifices. Let's try it over here, give it a little more dimension. That is a model horned altar from ancient Israel. It just keeps stuff from rolling off. And I keep one around just in case suddenly the temple gets restored and we need to do something about it. The other side of the portion is engaged with the Jewish calendar. All right. So, and of course, this is an old technology Jewish calendar. You can get immediate access to the Jewish calendar with all kinds of apps now. But, you know, I'm old enough that having one of these around really helps me. And it reviews the major holidays that come about. But I'm going to step into the space in between. There's two places interesting things come about. The first of them is a sort of transitional verse, which appears, actually, I think it's maybe 3 or 4 verses, that appears between the priestly subjects and the calendric subjects. And it says, "You shall keep my commandments and do them. I am Adonai. You shall not profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord whom you hallow, that brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai." Now, first thought, why? Why does this appear? I think it appears as a preamble to the holidays. Now, in ancient times, the major observances, we haven't added many of the holidays like Hanukkah and Purim yet to the Jewish experience, were what were called pilgrimage festivals. You had to go up to Jerusalem and present yourself to God. All right, you had to show up and make an appearance. And so those 3 holidays, of course, are Pesach, Passover, Sukkot, the Feast of Tents or Huts or tabernacles. I love the word tabernacle. And the holiday is coming up, Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, all of which are originally rooted in the agricultural and animal husbandry aspects of living in the land of Israel, but are also attached to our sacred history. All right. So God is summoning us to come and present ourselves in order to maintain our holy covenant, which brings me to an interesting, I think, observation. It's one that I was vaguely aware of, but I hadn't really sort of put it all together. But I'm reading a book right now called Created Equal, which is by an Orthodox scholar from Bar Ilan University. He's talking about a familiar subject, which is that the covenant, the agreement, the contract that God makes with the Israelites resembles ancient contracts called suzerain contracts that were made between an overlord king and a subordinate king. Ancient empires were not nation states. Kings' power extended as far as they could conquer or dominate. And I guess the Hittites, what they like to do is when they conquered a territory, they turned that territory, its state apparatus, specifically its king and its royal entourage, into tribute providing subordinates. And they made them sign a contract. And so the suzerain treaty would be the Hittite king would say something like, "Oh, I am, this is what I've done for you. I saved you from a flood. I saved you from a drought. I defended you from threatening enemies, and therefore you're going to submit yourself to me, and you're going to be my beloved friend forever. And as a result of that, you're going to do certain things for me, and I'm going to do certain things for you." The over king, the Hittite king, would I'll provide you with security. I'll be nice to you. I will grant you certain honors, and in exchange, you will give me tribute. You will not make any agreements with any other kings. You will provide me with certain honors, and or sometimes military levies. I may need soldiers at times, so you need to send me some of your militia to fight on behalf of the Hittite Empire. These are the kinds of things that this was done. And quite honestly, the covenant at Sinai is modeled on this model. All right. And we've known this for a long time, right? When it begins in the Ten Commandments, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, who brought you out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods beside me. That is a direct imitation of the Hittite prologue, where the overking says, "Look what I did for you. Now you have to serve and honor me." All right. So we've known that, but here's the interesting thing. And this is what this scholar from Bar Ilan University pointed out. In a Hittite contract, it's a contract between a king and a king. It's a contract between two elites who agree to certain conditions. In the Israelite version of the covenant, however, there is no king. And the covenant is made between God and each and every individual Israelite. You probably know this if you think about it, because of the reading that we do on the morning of Yom Kippur, where we talk about, "See, you stand here today, your men, your women, your children, and even the servants in your property, to accept this covenant I present before you." And it's binding not only on you, but it's binding upon all of your children and grandchildren in memoriam. That is the unique move. And there are always unique moves in the Hebrew Bible that break it loose from the cultural traditions of the ancient world, that we go from being part of a crowd of servants and slaves and tribute givers who sit underneath a king who is the tribute taker, who then gives tribute to another king. And we come into a direct relationship with God. God is our king. God is the monarch of the divine empire, and each and every one of us is in a personal relationship. So we're no longer just hoi polloi at the bottom of the social rung. We're minor kings, right? We're part of the relationship with God directly, not indirectly. It doesn't necessarily seem so revolutionary now in a culture where we honor democracy and things like that. It was pretty revolutionary in ancient times. So, one of the general obligations that is placed upon an under king is to appear before the Hittite king on a regular basis. It's kind of a trust but verify thing. And so usually there's a mandate that the under king will have to show up, maybe with his tribute, and make a presentation to the face of the king. And I think that the festival holidays are a kind of theological imitation of this ancient social practice. Because we are in the covenant with God, we have to make a regular appearance at each of the holidays. And so that is the origin of that practice. And I think it's rather interesting. I like to call this social theology, where we create notions about how we relate to God that are based in our own life experiences. Of course, none of this is our life experience. We talk about God very differently now. But understand, when we always talk about God, we are using our own experiences to frame our understanding. Now, that's fascinating, but I want to go on to something else. And that is that in the middle of all of the instructions about the holidays, at the holiday of Shavuot, there appears something more instructions than was appearing for the other holidays. And it goes like this: when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of the field, peah. Neither shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest, leket. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am Adonai, your God. So, unlike the other holidays, we get these instructions about a very primitive social service to provide support to the poor in our land, and in a society where the overwhelming majority of people were engaged in raising crops. This was the primary form of wealth. If you had land, you could make a living. You could even make a successful living. Without land, you got nothing. And so the poor people, the people who weren't landed at that time, the people who were orphans and widows and maybe foreign refugees, had no innate source of income. And so the average Israelite is commanded to help them out. All right. So there's three kinds of this service for the poor. There's peah, which means corner. It's the same word that refers to the curls that you'll often see on ultra Orthodox men. Leket means gleanings. And the third one, shechicha, is forgotten produce. And so at each stage of the harvest process, you're asked to add a little bit more to help the poor out. So peah, corner, means that you don't harvest everything. You deliberately choose to leave some crops on the edge of your field for the poor. All right. So you don't even bring a scythe to that. The second one is when you are harvesting and you are scything the grain and you're gathering up sheaves, which is a mechanical process I think we can all understand. You hit it with the sheath and you cut it, or with the scythe and you cut it, and then you tie it up with a reed or with one of the other grain stalks, and you got a sheaf. However, in the process of all of that, there's always going to be some sheaves that escape your control. You are commanded deliberately not to pick them up. That would be our natural inclination. Reach down, scoop up the ones that fell out of the sheaf and stick them back in. No, you have to consciously look at them and say, that is for the poor. And then finally, after a long, exhausting day, you've got your sheaves scattered around your field, and you go out and you gather them up and you bring them back to your sukkah or your hut to prepare them for their initial storage. And lo and behold, you forgot a couple of sheaves. There's stuff out there that you actually bound up and you're retired. You didn't go to that corner of your field. It's out of visibility. You forgot about it by sunset. You have to leave it. Again, it's a gift for the poor. All right. So 3 times in 3 phases, productive Israelites are asked to assist those who cannot produce or for whatever reason are left out of the Israelite economy. Now, I'm going to talk about Peah for the moment. Of course, the Talmud spends a great deal of time talking about all 3 of these processes, but Peah, I think, is probably the most intriguing for the simple reason that it is, the Talmud says, this is a commandment without measure, whose reward is without measure, meaning that there is no set amount. If you cut to the edge of your field and you get to the corner and you leave 3 stalks up, theoretically, you fulfilled the obligation. If you leave, a basket full of stalks, you fulfilled the obligation. If you leave 3 basketfuls of stalks, you fulfilled the obligation. So there's no parameters to this commandment, and it sort of relies on us to be generous in our heart. Now, the Talmud accepts that up to a certain point, but it does end up setting up a minimum eventually, 1/60th. You should leave 1/60th of your produce for the landless, the poor, the orphan, the widow, et cetera, et cetera. And so this becomes almost a tax in Talmudic times, but it is framed along these ideas. Now, why does this commandment appear right here at Shavuot? Well, the obvious thing is that Shavuot is the end of the barley harvest and the beginning of the wheat harvest. Throughout the summer, the ancient Israelites would plant different produce at different stages of the growing season in order to maximize what they had. And so they would start very early in the spring bringing up barley, and then they would move beyond barley to wheat or winter wheat, which would grow into the late summer. Probably they're planting other things that they hope will grow in the most ideal conditions, garlic and onions and herbs and beans and things like that. And so this is how Israelites ensured themselves. Now, first of all, let me observe that it does make sense that we do this, or we remind ourselves of this, at the time when the Shavuot harvest is happening. So it brings it immediately to mind when these instructions are read. On the other hand, it also is the 3rd time that these rules are spelled out for the farmers and olive growers and fruit growers of the land of Israel, emphasizing how important this is. All right. You cannot take everything from your field, no matter how hard you have labored to produce it. Something has to be shared. And do keep in mind that our ancestors lived in a world that was not full of a lot of food surplus. A great harvest meant very prosperous times. A decent harvest would carry you through, But I'm sure with fair amount of regularity that harvest would fail, or they would falter, or the rain would come at the wrong season, or pests would get it. So you're giving from your need, unlike what most of us are able to do today, which is to give from our surplus. So this is a very profound uh, idea about our obligations to the poor. Understand too, another seeming slightly invisible part of this is what follows, and that is that this is the only place in ancient Near Eastern literature in our Bible that we see the first time that there is an established idea that the poor are entitled to support, that everyone should have access to the basic necessities. And that's a remarkable thing. All right. It is probably overstating it slightly, but it is in effect the first step towards a social state, a place where there will be a social safety net for everyone. It's not much of a social safety net. We can see that in the story of the book of Ruth, where Ruth is forced to go out and glean for her and Naomi when they return basically penniless to the land of Bethlehem. There are implicit dangers to it. You can see that Boaz has to instruct his workers not to bother this attractive young Moabite woman. So probably gleaners did encounter hostile property owners, exploitative people, and things like this. So it's an idealized social model, and we can tell that from the Bible itself. But it is a remarkable claim that the dignity of every person includes the dignity of being able to live, even in the worst times of struggle, and that we all have an obligation to help each other out. It seems remote and strange to us, but it's really one of the most beautiful aspects of the Hebrew Bible. So remember, you, I, everyone, we're in a direct covenant with God. We are kings, but we are not the sole rulers of the world. We have a king of kings who rules over us, or if you prefer, a queen of queens. With gender issues, a whole different thing. But remember that, but also remember that as kings, we have an obligation to provide for the poorest around us. Uh, a society of compassion, a society of plenty, a society that sustains everyone with a measure of dignity.